This is the show dedicated to raising up the next generation of men of faith and character. My name is Mark Stanifer. Welcome to the Next Man Up. Well, hey guys, welcome back once again to the Next Man Up podcast. So glad to have you with us and to be part of this community that is raising up the next generation of healthy and godly men. Excited for you to be back once again for another episode today. Before we get into today's subject and topic, I want to just pause once again to inform you or remind you that our new video course is here. It's called Forging Men, Rediscovering the Ancient Path to Manhood. And if you are a dad who's raising a boy that's 16 or under, someone that you really love and care for, if you want that boy to become a healthy and a godly man down the road, if you want to be more strategic and intentional in your fathering, and if you want a vision and a process that brings everything together for this bigger purpose, then Forging Men is for you. It's a self-paced video course that launches on April 2nd with a group of other dads who are like-minded that want to learn how to build a customized initiation process to take their boy from being a boy into manhood so that he knows what it means to be a man. He knows what's expected when he arrives, and he's welcomed and celebrated into and by the community of men in his life. If this is getting you excited and sounds like a tool that you want in your father toolbox as you're raising your son, then head out to our website, thenextmanup.com/forgingmen. You can find all the information. You can get yourself signed up for this next group that begins on April 2nd. We would love to have you as part of this next group, and I can't wait for you to experience the benefits that come from guiding your son on his path to manhood through the initiation process. Once again, it's thenextmanup.com/forgingmen. Head out there, get all the information, get yourself signed up, and join us beginning on April 2nd. Okay, so now for today's topic, we are going to break down travel sports. We've not covered that on the show before, but I think there are a lot of you out there that have experienced, are thinking about experiencing, or wondering if maybe travel sports might be right for you and your son or your daughter. And so we're going to break down how to think about getting into this, some things to think about, some things to ask yourself. This is a really, really good conversation. And as we get into it, you'll understand what I mean by that. This isn't just about gear and which sport and all that. This gets deeper into motivations as to why travel sports might be a good fit or might not be a good fit for your child or for your family. So that's the first. The second first is we've got a couple returning guests. Two of our most popular guests, Craig Fullen, who appeared in episode 98 and 99, and then Jon Couser, who was with us for episode number 122 and 123, are back to talk about this topic of travel sports from their own experience as coaches and as fathers. And I'm telling you, they've got some good insight and wisdom to share with you, some things that you probably haven't thought about, and certainly some things to think about if you are moving down this path, at least of considering participating in the travel sports space. So, excited to share this with you. Let's break down travel sports. Here we go. Well, Craig Fullen and Jon Couser, two of our most popular guests, back in the studio today. So cool to have you guys with us, to be face-to-face doing this, given the year that we've had. I appreciate you guys coming out, and I look forward to getting into the topic today.
Grateful to be here.
Yeah, excited.
So the last time you were here, Craig, we were talking about mindset and joy and some of your story, right? And Jon, when you were here, we were talking about your fathering journey, and you were representing All Pro Dad. We're going to toss all of that out today and go in a completely different direction. And you guys are okay with that, right?
Do we have a choice?
Yeah, we already committed. We're here.
Well, good. I'm just a little bit of a disclaimer. So we're gonna tee up this. Well, first I should acknowledge that this is the first time we've had repeat guests on the show. So thank you for coming back. As I said, two of our most popular guests. So that's a first, and we're also going to tee up a topic that we haven't covered before, which is this topic, the space of travel sports, which, as you both know and we'll get into, has become uber popular over the last couple of decades. But before we get into that specifically, let me just say that while we're talking about sports here, the idea of travel sports extends beyond just some of the sports that you guys are most intimate with. It's this bigger commitment to get our kids into different things that take up time on the weekends and after school, more than just school activities. So there's a kind of how we're going to use the phrase travel sports. And before we go too far into the topic, what I thought would be good is to give the listeners a sense of why you, Craig, and why you, John, on this topic, right? We've had you here before on the previous topics, but why back on this topic? And so, Craig, why don't you take a shot first? Like, why Craig for this topic in particular?
So my son has been involved with travel baseball since he was really 6 or 7 years old, and has had quite the journey. And from the ups and downs of travel sports, we've seen the highs, the lows, the pros, the cons. He's now a high school baseball player, and having that perspective, and also just with my mindset, mental performance coaching, which I had to actually implement to get him through the travel sports process, it's just given me, I think, a unique perspective, as well as my additional training that I've gotten from being associated with Positive Coaching Aliance,
yep,
which is really it's a nonprofit that's focused on developing athletes as people, as well as making them better performers on the field. But it's very scientifically based, that some of the practices that we're seeing and some of the things that people are doing in the travel sports and really just the competitive sports arena in general are counterproductive to the well-being and actually the better performance of seeing better performance from our young athletes.
So those things go hand in hand then, right? Like the science and the performance and the well-being of the person, not just the athlete.
Absolutely. And I think too, just with, the mental health concerns we now see with youth and with the pressures that travel sports involves, I think we just need to be a lot better educated on how to navigate this space.
And so beyond just being a father, you've also coached in this space too, right?
I have. So I have coached a number of years at the travel baseball level, a couple of years as a head coach of a travel baseball team, multiple years as a assistant coach. So I've kind of seen a lot of different things in that area.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to getting your perspective both as the coach and as the father as this unfolds.
Right. And just, in the last few years, I've been lucky enough just to be the father. So that's what's been nice.
Yeah, cool. All right, so that's Craig. Thanks, dude. John, so same question. What is it that brings you into this topic and in fact prompted you to suggest this one from the beginning?
So similar to Craig, I've got children who have participated in travel sports. So I've got 5 kids. 4 of them have participated in some version of travel sports. So we've touched soccer, baseball, and basketball. We've done swimming, so we've done a lot of the sports, and then also like Craig, I've coached. So I have both a soccer coaching license with U.S. Soccer, and then a coaching license for baseball through USA Baseball. So I've spent a lot of time. I have over a decade, which always kills me to think that I've lived that much life.
It sounds longer when you use that word decade, right?
Yeah. Of coaching sports and being around travel sports, but mostly the reason that this topic was important to me is some of the experiences I've had with players who join one of my teams who talk about what it's like on other teams and some of these experiences that they've had. And it's like, not saying that the way that I do things is the right way. It's a way. And I'm sure we'll talk about during the episode that there are lots of ways to be successful. But I just want to let people know that they can make choices as they're progressing down this travel journey to make sure that it's a good experience for them as parents, their child as a player, and then their family overall.
Yeah. Yeah, good. So that's why you guys are in this conversation. Full disclosure, we have not had any travel sports experience. There was a moment where we were considering seriously hockey. And sometimes hockey can feel a little bit like a travel sport. And it was outside of a school context for us. And we were do we, don't we for a period of time and then opted not to. That's about as close to the topic as I've gotten personally. But I know it's ballooned in popularity. There's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of things that go probably undiscussed in the process of making the decision, as we'll get into. And so I'm thankful that you guys are here as dads and as coaches and with hearts to help those listening to be able to think through some of these things before and even during the decision-making process or during the season. So with that as the preamble and the interlude, let's start attacking some of the questions that I have or that I'm sure our listeners have. So how about this one? So like what has caused travel sports to become so popular over the last, I don't know, has it been 1 decade, 2 decades? It feels like a couple decades to me, but what's really, from your perspectives, what's really prompted the rise in popularity?
I'm going to say this often probably because I think this is an emotional topic for people. So I am not, no matter what I say, I'm not casting judgment on anything, any aspect of this. I'm just providing a perspective.
Okay. Disclaimer noted.
Thank you. So I think a couple things that I'll cover, and then I'm sure Craig will have something to add. One is there is more awareness of what other people are doing within your friends' circle, which creates a desire for certain people to also be doing what other people are doing. I think they call it the fear of missing out. FOMO. So I think there are some people who say, oh, they're doing it, and look how happy they appear to be doing it. So if I do it, I'll be happy too. So I think that's one aspect. And then I think the second aspect is there is a lot, it's become a big business almost, if you will. And I don't say that for the team that your child is on is probably not making a lot of money off of your participation, but the coach that you send your kid to, the facility that you use, the uniform company that provides the uniform, the equipment manufacturer, there is a lot of money to be made off of participating in any sport, but it seems the bar seems to go up when you get the idea of travel sports. So I think that's 2 reasons.
Craig, what would you add?
Yeah, the FOMO thing was the thing that stuck out to me. I think once you get your kid into it, it's kind of like this keeping up with the Joneses kind of mentality, right? You're like, well, and once you start seeing what the other kids are doing and whatever, well, little Johnny's doing this, and if my son's not doing this or my daughter's not doing this, you feel like you're getting behind. And I would even say that I remember when I first started coaching Little League, okay? I think it was Little League. And I went to a baseball meeting, and there was a dad there who had some older sons, and he's like, oh, this is great, because by like 2nd or 3rd grade, they got to figure out what they're going to play for the rest of their life. And I'm like,
hold on, 2nd or 3rd grade?
Yeah, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, And that was the mentality that he had. And there wasn't the person who was giving the instruction there. It was just a dad that I happened to know who was sitting next to me at this meeting. And that really kind of bothered me, because just this idea that these kids got to specialize so early, and that actually I think that the data would not support that. I'm kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I'll just take this opportunity that even if you talk to a lot of college coaches, that they talk about they like to recruit multi-sport athletes because they think that they're more athletic, they're more developed, they're more adaptable to different situations. So it's just kind of interesting, though. But there's this idea that kids need to specialize really early.
Okay, so I want to ask your opinion on this. So you both affirm the FOMO idea, right? This fear of missing out. I wonder. Just react to this. I wonder if it's more than just missing out, that there's perhaps some unspoken insecurity in the parent, that maybe they aren't doing what needs to be done because their kid isn't in the sport. Or maybe there's even more to it than that. John, you're kind of shaking your head.
I'm just wishing you saved that question for later so nobody hangs up and quits listening this early. Because, yeah, right? Like, so much so. People are just trying to figure out their own life as they go. And sometimes as a parent, you bring your kids along that journey. And I'm going to say something that might be really controversial, so I apologize. And it's almost like you use them as a test case. Like, I wonder if I would have done this, how would that have gone? And then so you say, hey, I regret not having done this. Why don't we see what happens if you do this? Like, I regret stopping playing sports early or not specializing. So let's see what happens if I help you specialize.
Interesting. I had a conversation just recently with a friend, and the whole topic of regretting something in sports that didn't happen for him came up. And it was in relation to somebody else. It wasn't him as a dad trying to push this through his kids. But like, dude's in his mid to late 50s, and he's still thinking about those experiences that didn't happen because way back when. So I hear you. Craig, you look like you want to say something too.
Well, it's interesting comment that John made on that, because I think that, here we are with the next man up, and, I'm still trying to figure out how to be a good parent here. And I've got a high schooler, and I'm still making mistakes and trying to get better. And I know that all your listeners that are kind of the same mindset, I would think. And one of the things to add to this, which maybe is part of the FOMO element, is the whole idea of a potential college scholarship down the road. Yep. As the cost of college keeps going up, these ideas that, well, maybe my son or daughter can get a scholarship if they play a sport becomes much more of a factor maybe in people's minds. And I remember growing up, people really weren't talking as much about college scholarships and that being like the end goal. But that seems to be the end goal. I remember actually the other sport that we didn't mention is that, I've coached tennis. I don't do it actively right now, but I did. And just actually having a conversation with a parent who had a high schooler who personally I thought was kind of a okay tennis player. And the parent was really big on, well, maybe she can get a scholarship. And, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is about the parent wanting the scholarship.
Yeah.
Because I didn't see the passion. I didn't see the talent. I didn't see any of that in the kid. So
I love that you said that, because there's even now a business of companies that help your kid get the right scholarships. Mm. And this is maybe where my family is falling short a little bit, because we've engaged with those companies. And so I have one son who's a freshman, and we had a conversation with this company 2 nights ago. So he's a freshman. So he's going into his freshman year, which means he's never played a season of high school baseball. And this guy was like, well, which colleges are you talking to? Right? Who are you sending emails to? What are you? And so I finally put the phone on mute. I said, son, he is a salesman. A sales tactic is creating a sense of urgency like you're missing out. That's what he's doing. You should not have done any of this at this point, right? So you're okay. But it was just like he was trying to create in us a fear that we'd already missed out on every possible opportunity. And it was like, that is the furthest thing from the truth.
So when you said FOMO, I think maybe one takeaway early on in this conversation is to recognize that there's lots of different F's represented in that FOMO, and part of growing as a parent in the decision-making process is just teasing those out, figuring out what is it that I feel like I'm going to miss out on, or my kid's going to miss out on, and at least putting it out on the table so that you can have an open and honest conversation about it, rather than just that emotional reaction of like, I got to keep up with the Joneses because we're going to miss out.
I mean, that whole idea of naming your fears so that they become real and you can deal with them, that's not about sports. That's a life thing.
Right. Okay, so having kind of set up the topic and where travel sports have come from, I wonder, would you guys just take a couple minutes and just talk about some of the big pros as well as the cons that you see related to the travel sports, again, broadly defined, again, to participating as a family in this type of activity?
If you have a son or daughter who is very passionate about the game and wants to get better, because that you're generally going to have a higher quality of competition and more opportunity to play, they may thrive in that environment. And again, I said may. And there are a lot of factors that may go into that. It may depend on their age, their maturity level physically, mentally, and all those things can come into play. And one thing that we should just kind of keep in mind too is there are different levels of travel sports. And so, just lumping every travel team into a single category may not be appropriate, because there are different levels and people can choose from different levels, which may be more appropriate. Now, that's another story, whether people are actually making that right choice. I'm sure John will probably have some comments on that. But, I think it's, for me, just in terms of just seeing my son and his experience, it's been about that he has such a passion for the game and just being able to engage in that competition. And he has made incredible friendships nationwide with players that he's played with all over the country as a result of it.
I think that's great, because when I was thinking about how do you know if your kid is ready, for me that was a two-part answer, and half of that answer was they're passionate about it, right? You have to love the sport in order for travel sports to be a positive, because if you're just meh or lukewarm, travel sports is going to be very difficult because it is a bigger commitment. So I'm glad you said that. So when I think of positives, I also think that typically coaches in a travel league, and once again, depending on level, they want to be there, right? Sometimes in recreational programs, we're mostly all volunteers, but in recreational programs, you'll get the email towards the beginning of the season, hey, we still need 4 more volunteers to coach a team.
Right.
And I am eternally grateful for the 4 people who stand up and say, I will do that. That's how my coaching career started, is my kids were young and they said, we need 1 more coach. And I was like, why not? So I did it. But typically a pro is in a travel environment, the coach wants to be there and has a little bit more experience in that area of expertise.
So what are some of the negatives that like, even if it feels obvious or seems obvious as you're saying it, what are some of the cons just out of the gate?
It's much more cost prohibitive to play travel sports. Like it's if you pay $100 to play in a recreational league, you're probably going to play 10x that to play travel sports. So cost can be a negative.
Definitely cost. I think also just you have the issue in terms of, your child being ready for it in the competitive nature, in whether that's actually going to be good for their well-being, right? So I think that you're also going to, and especially because of the commitment, which is going to involve, entire weekends, and where you're at, a sporting event, whatever that might be. It might be a basketball tournament or a baseball tournament or a swim meet. We've talked about that too. And you're just investing a lot of family time, going to these things. You might have other children that you've got to address, and how do you navigate that? And, what does it put a strain, not only as financial, as you mentioned, John, but just mental and just physical and everything else in terms of the family dynamic. And, you can have burnout not only at the child level, but at the parent level as well.
The phrase that's rolling through my mind is wear and tear,
Yeah.
right? Wear and tear on the parents, wear and tear on the family, wear and tear on the bodies, the emotions, the mental.
Well, and just if I could go kind of on, keep going with that theme, because of the additional commitment, that if it's not the right fit for your child, that long season, that heavy commitment you're doing is going to have a much heavier burden on them. And then maybe your entire family, because of just that not being the right fit.
And then Craig used a word earlier in his first part of that where he said competitive. That's the other potential con, is when you're playing a recreational sport, everyone's pretty much on the same page on why you're there and the expectations around being there. But once you move into that travel domain, that's where you have to start looking out for, well, why? What is this coach's philosophy? Are we here to win at all costs? Are we here to develop and hope that gets us to win? Do we live somewhere in between? So that could be another con, is you're going from an environment where your kid has loved some aspect of the sport, and now you're moving into another environment where potentially the intent can be different.
You guys haven't said it specifically, but what I'm hearing in both of you is this idea of really understanding why. Why are we moving in this direction? What's the motivation? What's the goal? And again, it's sort of been implied, but I see you both shaking your head like this becomes the starting point.
Start with why.
Right, exactly. Again, and not just about sports, but that application here makes a lot of sense because of the cons, because of some of the other motivators that are there, like to sell equipment and to sell field time and to sell scholarship application support, right? There's other influences that folks may not be aware of. So like you said, Craig, start with why.
Well, and if I could just run with that a minute, because that it start from why are you doing this? But I think John kind of made the point, like, then why are you choosing this particular league or team? Mm-hmm. And are you asking the right questions to make sure it's the right fit and that it's the right why? And I think that's John even commented earlier when we were talking about this, that it's rare that he gets questions from parents about his coaching philosophy and why he's doing that, which as a coach, I should take a step back. As a parent now, and helping my son navigate it, I would ask coaches that question. What is your coaching philosophy and what coaches inspired you? And if I got an answer that was kind of vague, that was a red flag for me, because I really think a coach needs to have a very specific philosophy. You don't have to agree with it, but they have to have something that this is how I'm going to coach. This is the standards that I coach by, how I'm going to treat the kids, how I'm going to make them feel. And I don't think enough parents ask that question. And John's shaking his head. They're not asking that question.
They really don't. And that's why, one of the organizations that I'm involved with, I love the fact that as an organization, we say, if you're going to coach for us, here is the Matheny Manifesto. I want you to read it. And if you don't agree with it, then we're not interested in having you coach for us. And when parents come to us, when you join our organization, here is the PDF, not the entire book, but the PDF version of the Matheny Manifesto. If you don't agree with it, then don't sign your kid up, because this is how we're going to roll. And I will be honest, I've done that every year I've been with this team, with this organization, and there have been years where I didn't hold myself accountable for that. And those have been the years where I've had the most problems with parents who don't play by the rules.
Well, can I just jump in? Because I think it would be helpful for the listeners. I love the Matheny Manifesto. I actually was just looking at it today, coincidentally, but just explaining what that is, because I think some people might not
know. That was my question.
So I won't go into what the manifesto is a whole lot, because that would be boring to a lot of folks. But Mike Matheny was a professional baseball player. He played catcher. Historic career, right? Went to a Division I school, Michigan, actually. There you go. You'll love
Blue.
that. He then played for the St. Louis Cardinals. He later, at the end of his career, became a coach. He was with the Cardinals when they won a couple World Series, right? So if he says it works, it works. I will say it's a little old school in some of its aspects, so it may not, be real. There may be parts of it that people would be like, oh, that's very old-fashioned. But essentially it is this idea that as a parent, you are in a travel sport because you have reached the point where you can no longer do everything to help your child achieve their goals, which gets back to the why. So you're seeking out the guidance of someone that you trust and believe in what their process is to help your child achieve their goals. In order for that process to work, you need to let the coach. And as a parent, your only role is to support and love your child as they figure out this journey for themselves. And that's is that a fair short summary?
Yeah, and it was just, and Mike Matheny wrote it when he first, I think it was when he stepped away from the game, actually as a player, and prior to becoming a major league coach, a major league manager, he coached one of his sons'
Little league teams.
Yeah. And he was like, I'm only going to do this if everybody understands how I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And it in the letter that he wrote became viral, actually eventually turned into a book that he wrote. And, now he's the manager of the Kansas City Royals. And if I could just kind of, again, just add a little bit of color to this idea of asking the coach about his philosophy. So I had this conversation about a year ago with my son when he was looking for a new team. And I talked to a couple coaches, and the coach that the team that he eventually went to, I asked the coach, what coach influenced you the most? And he did not hesitate. And it was his little league coach. And I said, why? And he said, because he cared about me. And I was like, done. Like, it was like, that was what I needed to hear. And at that point, because my son really wanted to go to this team. And when I heard that answer, that kind of confirmed that this was the type of coach that I wanted him to play for.
That's awesome. And that's such a good question. What is your coaching philosophy, right? Why do you do the things you do? And as a parent, set aside the topic of travel sports, but now you're the parent, you're going on a job interview. Would you ever accept a job without asking the boss, how are you going to treat me? You might not say that directly, but right, you are going to ask questions to understand, how am I going to be treated if I come work here? What are the expectations you're going to put around me if I come work here? Yet so many parents will hand their kid over to a coach, having not figured out, how are you going to treat my child? And what are the expectations you're going to put on them? And then they get into the situation, which is taxing because the seasons are longer, and you've made this financial commitment, which means you're a little more invested in it than you would be on a rec team. And so when you start to see and experience things, you might get frustrated when, had you taken the time to ask those two questions, you would have figured out right away, this is not the place for me.
John, that's an excellent analogy, because you're spot on. We would not just walk into a job blindly, even if they were waving buckets of money at us, right? We wouldn't just walk into a job blindly, most of us anyway. We would want to know, like, what are we getting ourselves into? It's an excellent analogy.
Good stuff.
Well, guys, I know that travel sports or even sports more generally is not a thing for everybody, for every guy. But if you've made it this far through this first half of the conversation, then my guess is sports plays a role in your life. And I would also be surprised if you didn't come away with some thoughts or some insights, maybe some new questions as a result of what Jon and what Craig had to share. When I reflect on this first part of the conversation, I think there are a few things that stand out to me. The first is this: how much fear really drives our decisions, either for ourselves or for our kids, and how naming those fears and at least being aware of what's underlying our decisions can go a long way to helping us make better decisions. I think the other thing that really stood out for me is answering this question: what is the motivation to play? And again, that may help to uncover some of those underlying fears, or it may help to bring more clarity or more awareness of what expectations are, what the goals and what the desired outcomes are for participation. Either way, it's a good question to ask going into the discussion or going into the decision-making process. What is the motivation? What is our big why for doing travel sports? So those are my big takeaways. What are yours? I'd love to hear from you. If you want to share them with me, you can get me at feedback@thenextmanup.com as usual. But either way, what are you coming away with? What's the big takeaway? What's the challenge? And if you are moving down this path, how can you take the content that you just heard and apply it to your decisions as you move forward? Now that's where we're going to pause for this. Coming up next week, in the second part of the conversation, we're going to get deeper into what parents can be thinking about specifically about when to know that they as a family are ready, or when to know when the child is ready to actually go down this path. How to decide on the best team or the best league to participate in. And if you go down this path, what are some things that you can expect to experience, and how can you support your child well in this experience as well? So those are some of the things that are coming next week. For now, we're going to land the plane on this travel sports breakdown. We'll pick it up next week as we normally do. And so that's it for today. We'll put a wrap on this. Until next time, guys, adios. Hey listeners, thanks for journeying with us on this Next Man Up podcast. We would love to hear from you. Maybe you have a question or an idea, perhaps a topic for us to consider. If that's you and you want to reach out to us, you can get us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. That's feedback@thenextmanup.com. Again, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we'll see you later.